Welcome to Shannon's Design to Driveway. I'm Warren Brown, and in this original series from Shannon's, I'm joined by motor historian David Burrell as we celebrate some of the most prominent Australian car designers to find out what inspired their designs. In this episode, however, we make a slight deviation and meet a man who is not a car designer as such, but nonetheless was responsible for some of the most prolific and important designs of Ford Australia through the 1960s to early 1990s. Our feature guest is David Ford, who is actually a product planner at Ford Australia, and whilst no relation to the Ford family, he spent 4 decades with Ford in Australia, Europe and the United States. Now, David Ford was right there at the birthplace of so many of Ford Australia's halcyon cars, such as the original Australian designed and made Fairlane and the very first performance Falcon, my favourite, the XR Falcon GT. David Ford had his hands all over the likes of the new era XA Falcon and the racing-inspired coupes. Plus, when Ford was locked in a key design battle with Holden as an oil crisis loomed, it was David Ford who would steer the Blue Oval towards the larger and all-new XT Falcon to challenge Holden and their new Commodore.
I'd always thought that I'd like to get a career in the aircraft industry, and had always played with little model planes as a kid and followed that through with my course at university. Ford Motor Company offered a much higher starting salary than anybody else, and I thought, well, cars sound a lot closer to planes, and I actually went into manufacturing instead, where I spent the first 18 months of my career, which I think was probably one of the best things I ever did, because I spent a lot of time out in the plant understanding how cars were built, and it was after 18 months when a vacancy came up in product planning that I then moved from manufacturing into the product planning area. The XR Falcon, I think, was a huge step up in terms of vehicle concept from both the US and Australian approach. I think a much better Falcon than their original XK was, which needed far more modification for the Australian level. It was ideal package for the Australian market. It improved vehicle interior size, and it fitted perfectly where I think the Australian market was wanting to go, and which would give Ford quite an advantage and step up on all of the competition at that stage. So we took that basic car, modified it quite significantly in a number of areas to just add a little bit more ruggedness to it. Also changed the design and extending the crease line right down the side of the vehicle to give it a bit more length appearance rather than the slightly stubbier effect on the US Falcon. Plus repackaged the spare tyre, which used to stand up in the boot of the US car and totally block the luggage. Some of the guys in Geelong manufacturing worked miracles to actually create the panels to do that. It set a new standard rather than us chasing Holden. I think it suddenly put something out in front of Holden that they had to start chasing. I think it was unquestionably where we started to leapfrog and really confidently move forward with what Bill Burke was teaching us as our mantra, which was beat Holden, beat Holden. So, but yeah, certainly it was a great motivational aspect within the company. We really felt with the XR that we were at last on our way.
The XR Falcon forced Holden to increase the wheelbase of the HK model to avoid it being perceived as smaller. Here was Ford leading the market, and they set the dimensions of the Aussie family car for the next 50 years. Quite remarkable when you think about it.
There was a lot of argument about that for a while, but in the end, Bill Burke said he can have the bigger wheel arches to assist Bathurst. Sales and marketing were unsure about it, but they did like the idea of it helping win at Bathurst. L. Turner was very, very keen on it. The product planning position was not do it. Bill Burke, who made that decision and said, right, I hear all the pros and cons, we'll go with the big wheel arch. Leaders are people who don't just manage, they actually encourage other people to excel. And Bill set direction, gave people a free hand, and away you went and did it. And he also had no tickets on himself. And he said Australians call a spade, and he said they'd tell me I was wrong, and sometimes, and he said, you know what? Quite often they were right. I was wrong sometimes. Bill was very, very keen on having a Landau T-Bird type vehicle in Australia off the Falcon hardtop. I argued with him that there was not really much of a market for two-door type vehicles of that sort in Australia, but four-door luxury vehicles was where we wanted to go. Well, you know, you may be right, but I want to have my other vehicle as well.
I loved how David challenged Bill Burke's view of the Landau. Whilst Burke saw the value of David's opinion of the LTD, but he was the boss and still wanted his luxury coupe. Did you know about the tray tables? Yeah, rear seat tray tables, seriously. But there was not enough rear seat space in the Landau, and there were concerns about safety. So that was the end of the idea for tray tables.
I was originally working on the XR Fairmont, and also there was another vehicle which had been identified that there was a market above the Falcon for a larger package size vehicle, and they had developed a vehicle which was going to be introduced as a derivative of the XR Falcon called the XRL. The front end was reasonably inexpensive, but the rear end sheet metal was causing a problem. I thought, well, the US Fairlane sheet metal should fit the rear end of the vehicle, so if we could import that sheet metal, we could bring it to market a year or more earlier than trying to actually tool it up, as well as save the initial investment on it. So I got hold of a US Fairlane brochure, cut the rear end off that, married it to a photo of the XRL styling photo we had there, and it appeared to match. So I took it into had it blown up into about a 2 metre plus size photograph, and took it into a product planning committee meeting and said, how about this for a vehicle, and let's call it the Fairlane. Just as they did in the US, and also you already had the name Fairlane established in the Australian market, whereas with XRL you would have had to establish what was going to be the name for the vehicle. How do you set up an image around it? And by being able to just adopt Fairlane really gave us a big step up in that marketplace, I think.
It's another case of Ford leading the market with insightful product planning to create the local Fairlane and the template for long wheelbase luxury cars. Again, Holden and Chrysler were forced to play catch up.
To me, Falcon had to create the image that it was Australian, it was not just another import, B, that it was a car suitable for the family, that it was easy and economical to run, but still had basic good performance. You could use it in the outback, you could use it in the city, you could tow with it, but then you had to create a body appearance which said that to somebody. Therefore it had to look like it's a good package size inside, it'll take people, but you don't want it to look bulky or overweight on the outside. That you wanted to look like it's stylish, modern, not a drab old man's car, but it's also going to look rugged, particularly going back to the original image, which was created around the original Falcon, where there were durability problems. and therefore all future Falcons, and particularly from XR onwards, you wanted it to look tough and rugged. Some who had some sporty inclinations, that's where the GS pack was extremely important when we introduced that it really did create a means of stylising or just making a little bit sportier the basic family sedan, but without going all the way out for a GT or a hot sports car which was uncomfortable to ride in. There, to me, that's really what the essence of Falcon is. Part of the plan was to try and keep the strengths of the Falcon but create more of a Europeanisation of it. And in fact, if you remember the motoring press, it had always been that if it were European it was much better than if it were American, etc. So trying to shift Falcon a little bit in that direction was the plan, and hence as we moved from XB to XC, the rear door, where I got them to drop the rear door belt line to just give a bit more open appearance to it as a progression towards where I saw the XD as being a vehicle which still had the full interior package but a slimmer exterior, more glass area, a slightly lighter, and try and create a European appearance to it. Some of the early versions of the Falcon they came up with were just still a bit too, I think, traditional an appearance, a little bit too rounded, a bit too perhaps American in there. I'd had one of the planners working for a year on how to get slimmer doors onto the Falcon so that the outside was much closer to the glass. I managed to persuade my boss to get a European designer out to create a version of the Falcon more in keeping with the European Granada of the time. And as a result, Trevor Creed came out from England to actually create a competitive clay model in Australia. So we actually had two groups working there. And one of the biggest problems on it had been lowering the belt line through the centre of the vehicle was what you did then when you got to the front, because you had to come up to the windshield angle and the rear view mirror, and at the rear, how do you finish it off? One day I just said to Trevor, well, what if you just kept it straight? And he then went away and created the dead straight belt line front and rear with the jump up, and I thought it looked fantastic. I'd been working in the US again at the time of the XD launch, and I came back and was surprised to find that the XD was not selling as well as I thought it should in that environment, despite the obvious advantages the vehicle had. And I went and saw Edsel Ford, who was Assistant Managing Director with responsibility for sales, marketing and that side of the company at that stage. And I said, Edsel, what's wrong here? I said, we've got a larger car with a more powerful engine and better fuel economy, and yet we're not selling more than the Commodore. So I said, well, what if you won the Shell Mileage Marathon? And he said, well, that'd be great. And I said, well, I don't have the budget and I'm not allowed to spend engineering money on that. But I said, if you fund it, I said, well, I'll build you a Shell Mileage Marathon winner. And he said, right. He said, you're on. So we built him one. He paid for it and we won it. And that suddenly turned around the whole motivation in the sales and marketing area, and also in the marketplace. Obviously, when we were able to advertise the Shell Mileage winner, we got to number one fairly rapidly thereafter.
The XD Falcon had David Ford's influence all over it. Smart European looks combined with weight-saving plastics and a robust, uncomplicated running gear, it helped Ford launch into its market leadership.
The original Fairlane, I guess I'd got to say, was one I'm really pleased about how that one came out. The second one would be definitely the XD Falcon. I think that was probably the best overall package area of what we did in that, not just with the vehicle shape and size, but we introduced so many new innovations in that vehicle with the new plastic bumper bar system, the all-new integrated instrument panel in the vehicle, the plastic fuel tank in that. That car had a lot of other innovations in it. And the third was probably the XCZH as a combined program, where we managed to refresh the XC but actually totally break the Fairlane and LTD away from it, where they were totally different, unique looking vehicles, and also differentiating well between the LTD and the Fairlane with the separate front end moulding we had between the two vehicles. I found Ford absolutely fantastic to work for. You came across such a variety of different types and styles of people, but some absolutely phenomenal leaders within the company, great people. I think back to when I first started working at Ford in the 60s, and you had Brian Ingalls, as he was in those days before being knighted, as head of manufacturing, who had flown Spitfires over the Normandy landings, as well as then, as I said, the charismatic Bill Burke and others I came across during my career. And I just think it's a fabulous period of time. I'm not sure if it can ever happen again. But it was a hell of a ride while I was on it.
Now, listening to David explain Ford's mantra of beat Holden reinforces that winning the sales race really started with great styling from the design studio, well before Moffat and Goss got behind the wheel. Like each of the designers featured in our series, you can tell David Ford is a car guy through and through. His passion to the Blue Oval is as evident today as it was when telling Bill Burke exactly what he thought of his idea of a luxury Ford coupe. But I'm happy Bill Burke had his way, including his luxury rear seat trays too. And I don't know about you, but I'd love to have a Ford Landau. Whilst he may not have been a designer, I'm pretty sure David Ford was never too far away from the clay models, and probably even had his own sketch pad too. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next episode of Shannon's Design to Driveway. In this episode, it's Chrysler's Dennis Nicole as he talks about the Charger, Valiant and Mitsubishi Magna. Plus, Dennis redraws the Charger for the first time in over 40 years.
Join Warren Brown and David Burrell in the new must-watch series Shannon's Design to Driveway. Watch now on the Shannon's Club.